Okay, everybody, in this interactive video, we're going to address the controversial question of what is a work of art? What makes something a work of art? And in order for us to proceed through the class, we have to have some ground to stand on, right? We have to stipulate some criteria for what's going to count as a work of art. Now, given like I said, this is a controversial topic because we it can be argued that this isn't that art is in the eye of the beholder. This is an entirely subjective um, evaluation, but that gets us nowhere. If every time we try to advance an analysis of an artwork or something that's put in front of us and said, hey, is this art? What do you think? We have to have something to work from. We can't, if we just say, maybe it is to you, but it isn't to me, then you're just disintegrating into this relativism that really is meaningless. We don't learn anything. We don't advance our concepts. We don't advance our perception. So we got to start somewhere. And even just by starting somewhere and working through these processes and just accepting as preliminary, some possible criteria for what makes a work of art, then, I mean, we could learn them all and then change our minds, but we got to learn them first, right? So that said, defining art and no definition for a work of art seems totally adequate. And there isn't one that is accepted universally. They may be, let's imagine you've got 10 of 10 definitions of art. They're all going to vary somehow and in some ways and stress some things over others and stipulate some criteria that others don't. That's just the way it is and has been. So rather than proposing a definition of art, instead, what we'll do is clarify some criteria or certain distinctions that can help us and guide us toward identifying works of art. And so, I mean, here's one to kick off. The term itself, a work of art, implies the concept of making, work, and art, which is short for artifice. So a work of art is usually said to be something that's made by a person, right? So in other words, we wouldn't say that your hamster can create a work of art. Again, rather than arguing back at any of these stipulations, we need to lay some down to work with in order to grasp all of this material better, even if they can be challenged. Right, so it sharpens our perception to begin somewhere. We got to start somewhere, even if it turns out that all of this is in the eye of the beholder. I hope you understand what I mean by that. So in other words, also sunsets and beautiful trees and found natural objects like driftwood, right? And insect paintings and songs by birds and all other sorts of natural phenomena. They're not considered works of art, even if you find them to be beautiful. So natural found stuff and natural phenomena are not considered works of art. Okay, now we're going to start to try to identify art conceptually, get a concept of art down. So to do so, let's look at three criteria for determining whether something is a work of art, other than that it's not a natural found object like we just discussed. So according to our textbook, and what we're going to go with is that one, the object or event, if it's like a play or a dance or something, is made by an artist or artists, Two, the object or event is intended to be a work of art by its maker or makers. And three, recognized experts agree that it's a work of art. And that's a challenging um, element. But again, we're going to go with it for the sake of applying theory to uh, practice, to incorporate theory and practice for this course, right? So, unfortunately, you can't always determine whether a work meets all of these criteria just by looking at it, right? Like if you just looked at this and didn't have this down there, you don't know whether it meets all of these three criteria because you don't know anything about it, right? You might not even know, right? You certainly don't know the artist's intention just by looking at it. You might not even know, first of all, this is a great example because you don't know anything. I'm glad I chose that one. So, because this fact can't be established by perception alone, just by looking at this thing, for instance, we have to be informed. We got to know some stuff about the alleged work of art, like this bottle rack by Marcel Duchamp. This fellow intended this to be a work of art. It was found by him, but manipulated a bit. So we know it that he intended it satisfies the second criteria. He somewhat satisfied the first. And then number three is totally controversial with regard to this specifically, right? So there's an example of how you got to know a little bit of something and an example of how you apply these criteria to identifying the work of art conceptually. Now, identifying art perceptually is a different and more complex matter. So, perception is what we can observe, hear, smell, taste, touch, feel. And conception is what we know or think we know, right? How we conceive of something and how we perceive something is different, but they're closely related. And oftentimes in the regular everyday world, we recognize an object because it conforms to our conception of it, right? Or an object or a person or a living thing, whatever the case might be. The perfect, if you're walking down the street and in many cases you see a person in a dress and high heels and long hair, we will recognize that person as a female because of she's this person is conforming to our conception. Our perception is conforming to our idea, but that might not be the case, right? Or this person might actually not be a female, or might not be a biological female, let's say, right? So my point here is simply that what you pick up with your senses, we often then throw it against a concept in our head and then make a determination, right? And then when you can't do that, you're like, what the heck is that? You see an animal that doesn't match any concept you have. You perceive an animal you have no concept for. It's confusing, right? Or objects for that matter. And also, for example, like in architecture, we recognize churches and office buildings as distinct because of our conception of what churches and office buildings are supposed to look like. It would be bizarre if you got a new job and they gave you the address for a new job in data entry, let's say, and they gave you the address for the place, and you showed up and it looked like a classic Catholic church, for instance. You'd be like, what the? Right? So that's another example of how we recognize an object because it conforms to our conception of it. So the ways of identifying a work of art, those three criteria that we just mentioned before, that it's intended to be a work of art by its maker, right? That it was actually made by somebody and that recognized experts agree that it's a work of art, those depend on the conceptions of the artist and experts on art, and not enough on our perceptions of the work itself. So, in other words, that's a pretty theoretical way of identifying a work of art. But when we're talking about the perceptual nature of art and how to identify art perceptually, like I said, it gets a little complex. I'll try to simplify it as well as I can. Um, and these all four of these work together. There are four basic terms or concepts that are related to the perceptual nature of a work of art, whatever art form it is, right? And that's artistic form, which is the organization of some medium that results in clarifying some subject matter. And it's participation, which is sustained attention and a loss of self awareness. It's subject matter, which is some value of ours expressed in the work of art. And then some content, which is the interpretation of subject matter. And these four come together in order to demarcate a work of art. Now, we'll take each of those in turn. So, artistic form, that is, just as a reminder, we're talking about the four basic terms related to the perceptual nature of a work of art. The first one is artistic form. So, all objects and events have some kind of form, right? They're bounded or delimited by time and space. And they have parts that are distinguishable relationships, that have distinguishable relationships with one another. So if we're talking about a building, right, it's separated out in space. It's taking up a certain amount of space. It has boundaries, right? If we're talking about, same with shapes, right? And shapes and their relationships to one another, as illustrated in this painting, right? There are boundaries and certain shapes and forms showing up over and over again that are interrelated with one another that we can perceive, even if that's not conscious. Or music, which is bound by time rather than space, right? A melody happens in a certain amount of time with a certain relationship of parts to whole, right? The notes are the parts. The whole is the composition that occurs in a discrete period of time. And this is known as artistic form. And to say that some object or event, meaning like a painting, a building, or a dance, or an orchestra, concert, uh, to say that some object or event has form, it means that it has some degree of perceptible unity. It's not coming at you as pure chaos with no organization and no beginning, middle, and end, or no boundaries. There's something that sets it apart from just regular chaotic nature, right? That's artistic form. And to say that something has artistic form implies a strong degree of perceptible unity in the thing itself, be it the event or the object created. The work of art has some degree of perceptible unity, where the parts are coming together to form a unified whole in some way. And once again, whether you are conscious of it or not, we're talking about art on the perceptual level, the sensual level. And it's artistic form that distinguishes a work of art from objects or events that aren't works of art, but as we said earlier, could still be beautiful and still could have emotional impact. right? They just may not be works of art. So artistic form implies that the parts that we perceive, like line in a painting, for instance, line, color, texture, shape, and space, have been brought together and unified for the most profound effect possible. And that effect is supposed to be revealing, it's supposed to be revelatory. So, in that sense, artistic form, it reveals, it clarifies, and it enlightens us. It gives us new perspective and meaning to something that someone values in life, some kind of subject matter that somebody has taken the time to say, stop, let's illuminate this subject matter and let me lend my eye to it and show it to you, reveal it to you in a certain way that might not have occurred to you before. This is artistic form. And a form that lacks a significant degree of unity probably isn't going to accomplish this. Like our daily experiences, for instance, usually are characterized more by disunity than unity. If you're walking around during any of your typical day, right? You wake up, you go and get, I know a lot of us live very organized lives, but nonetheless, you can't control what's going on around you. You wake up, you have your coffee, you check your, phone, you do X, Y, and Z, you head out in your car and you were expecting to get to the beach in 5 minutes, but instead there's a terrible car crash and you can't get on the traffic's backed up forever. And then there's a bunch of birds flying over you. And then there's horns honking out of this corner. And then and the sirens are coming. And then all of a sudden, it clears up and then it's beautiful. You've got sensory data bombarding you in all different and unpredictable ways, right? It's chaotic. The regular world is chaotic and stuff just comes at you in no preordained order. And we just try to make sense of it as we live, right? But for instance, novelists, when they're writing a book, typically don't write it like that. It would hardly be readable, right? They try to give a unity or order to these sorts of experiences and the experiences of their characters and tell a story that has, a plot and, development and follows a certain course of unfolding, right? If you give unity to experience that is not um, achievable or even available to us in the craziness of everyday life, even if you live an orderly life, you know? So the same is true with music. Noises and random tones in everyday experience lack the order that composers impose. Right? Composers take tones and noises, notes, and put them together in a way that makes sense and that harmonize and that come together in a unity. That's not the way the world sounds outside, right? So continuing with artistic form as one of the four basic concepts of perceiving a work of art, right? So, with all that said about unity and organization and order that art can bring, disunity or playing against expectations of unity can also be artistically useful at times. And some artists realize how strong the impulse toward unity is in those who have perceived many works of art, right? When you've seen a lot of different art, you realize that, man, there's something about human beings that wants to impose order upon the chaos of experience, right? And it's like it's an insight that comes to you after you look at a lot of art. So for certain people, they want to buck against this. right? So that tendency for the artwork work to impose order on disorder, right? And unity rather than disunity. They want to rebel against this, right? It's thought of as the unified and organized work of art is thought of as old fashioned. So these artists consciously rebel against that. Like, for instance, this is a Jackson Pollock, right? And it's thought that this is what he was trying to do. Enough of all this unity of art and order in it of perceptual order. Let's just throw that to the wind, but still maintain some kind of arguably perceptual unity and embrace the chaos at the same time, right? So, excuse me. So, what is argued, though, is that it seems that the effects achieved by a lesser degree of unity, like in this painting, they succeed only because we recognize them as departures from our well-known, highly organized forms. Like, how cool, they bucked the system, so it must be art, right? Now, participation and works of art are created, exhibited. Well, participation is the second or another of the four basic terms of that we use to identify works of art perceptually. So works of art are created and exhibited and preserved for us to perceive with not only undivided attention but also sustained attention, immersed attention. And artists, critics, and philosophers of art, which are known as aestheticians sometimes. I know that there's a job that some people do. It's called aesthetician, right? But this is a different. Generally agree about this. So if a work requires our participation in order to understand and appreciate it fully, then we have an indication that the work is art. We really have to get in there and forget about our cell phones and what's going on around us and what's nagging us and our stress, and we just allow ourselves to become absorbed in the work for a sustained amount of time, not just for a second, then we have a clue that we might be dealing with a work of art. And the ultimate test, further regarding participation, the ultimate test for recognizing a work of art is how it works in us and what it does to us. So participative experience of works of art are really, they're like communions. They're experiences that are so full and so rich and so fruitful that they enhance and enrich our lives. And because it's a work of art, and especially, like, let's consider a painting, it just sits there. You can spend as much time as you want to with it, right? That's not the case with normal everyday experience. The time unfolds and life marches on. A participative experience with certain kinds of works of art are sustainable over time. And out of all the four basic concepts, and those were, again, subject matter, artistic form, content, and participation is the most fundamental. If you're not participating, it's not an artwork. And if it's an artwork, then you're participating. Is kind of like the equation. That's the way it's thought about. Right? So otherwise, these other concepts, even if they make good sense in theory, they're not going to help to make art more important in our lives if we're not participating with the work. So, as participators, we don't think of the work of art using the same categories that we use with everyday stuff. Like, hey, what kind of thing is that? Like I was talking about earlier, we're supposed to, or it's argued that we grasp the work of art directly as a work of art, You don't look at, I mean, think about it this with a painting again. You don't look at a painting and say just to yourself, that's a painting. Or you can, but then you're not participating with it, right? You don't just say, hey, there's a painting, there is a play, there is a dance, there is a building. When you're participating, you engage the work of art directly, not the type of thing that it is, right? You absorb it. And when we're truly participators, our thoughts become so dominated by something that we're unaware of our separation from it. You soak it up, kind of become lost in it, right? So in this way, the artistic form, whatever that may be, initiates and controls thought and feeling. So let's look at these two elements of the four together. And I know this gets a little complex. This is a complex chapter. So hopefully by having this discussion and going through and looking at different photographs and such, this becomes a little more clear. Um, so the participative experience, again, that undivided and the sustained attention that we give to an artwork, it's induced, it's triggered by strong artistic form. And participation is not likely to develop with weak artistic form because weak form tends to allow our attention to wander. It doesn't grab us and hold us there. And one indication of strong form is the fact that participation occurs in the first place. That you look at it and go, whoa, and it knocks you out. And you can't take your eyes off it. That doesn't necessarily indicate strong form, but it is a good indication that you're dealing with strong artistic form, that you're drawn into participating. And another indication of artistic form is the way it clearly identifies a whole or a totality. So, I mean, I would argue, and again, I don't want to say in every one of these videos, this is a subjective matter. It's a given. There's certain elements of the arts are indeed subjective, but I don't want to beat that drum for the entire course, right? So certain things we're just going to have to go with, and if you disagree, you're entitled to disagree. But I would argue, as many would argue, that the picture on the right or the photograph on the right invites me to participate much more than the one on the left. And that's because the photograph on the right has stronger form than the photograph on the left. Photograph on the right, the way that the sticks are moving, are placed, right? It looks like a path that you're following. And the photograph is bounded on either side, right? With the way that the image is framed, it looks like a path going through and to somewhere, where this has much weaker form. What the photographer decided to capture here doesn't have as strong a form as this angle. You see what I mean? This is kind of like, oh, you took a picture of a bunch of sticks, and over here it looks like, a path going somewhere, right? So I would argue stronger form, weaker form. And some philosophers of art claim that the presence of artistic form, and it's what they call significant form, is all that's necessary to identify a work of art. And by significant form, in the case of paintings, for instance, they mean the interrelationships of elements, like again, line to line, line to color, color to color, color to shape, shape to shape, shape to texture, right? The interrelationships of elements is significant form to them. And according to the proponents of this idea of significant form, if we're taking really like careful and explicit notice of the way that something was painted, right? Like its execution. And I can't believe how on earth did they possibly make this painting look so real? And look at the shading here. And look, if we're paying attention to that kind of stuff too much, say the proponents of significant form, we're not perceiving it properly as a work of art. We're experiencing the painting instead like an illustration telling a story or a how-to manual. And in a sense that reduces the painting to commercial or instructional communication. And for these people, the proponents of significant form, they often will say that the school of art known as, or the style known as Impressionism, as opposed to representationalism, is the one that best embodies true artistic form. We'll cover Impressionism versus representationalism later in the course, but for instance, Basket of Apples by Paul Cézanne is a classic Impressionist piece. And on the left, Still Life with Salt Tub um, by Pieter Klaas is a classic representationalist piece. This artist aimed for to make their painting look as much like the stuff that's sitting in front of you on the table as they could, where this artist is trying to capture the impression that this stuff makes. It's not that this person can't paint as well as this person. It's a different style. Now, these proponents say that it's impressionism that can that is really the school of painting that best embodies true artistic form. But that's an argument, right? Not necessarily the truth. Now we're on to content, which is another aspect or basic concept of identifying art perceptually. So unless a work has content, and content should be considered meaning that's fused or embodied with its form, then for our purposes in this course, the work won't be considered um, art. So in other words, content is the meaning of the artistic form. And we don't perceive an artistic form and then a content. We perceive them as inseparable. We perceive them at once if they work, if they're properly unified, right? If you've got true and good, strong artistic form and strong meaning united, then you don't pick them apart. You don't say, "Oh, well, I can see all that this dance is about um, happiness and joy and lightness, and but the way that she's dancing it and her moves and the way she executes them or the form is weak." Then you can see the difference, right? When you have weak form, then you can separate it out. You can say, I can see she's trying to make this look like it's happy and light and blissful, but because she hasn't mastered her form, her technique, those two separate out from one another. When they're both strong, they're perceived as inseparable, right? They come at you like as one. So, but we can, if we want to, separate them analytically if we're watching a dance, for instance, or a dancer. But when we do that, you're not having a participative experience. You're analyzing instead. So what I've got some pictures up here of art. For instance, it's thought this is Madonna when she was young. It's thought that Madonna had a lot of content, like emotional and sexual content to her dancing, but her form, her artistic form was weak, right? One more time, you can have whatever opinion you want to I'm talking about dance experts who have watched her, and that's their opinion, and that's what they argue for, and that's what we're just going to stick with that for a minute. A lot of content, a lot of emotion, a lot of stuff to put out there, but weak form as far as classical dance is concerned. And then, if you've ever seen Black Swan, that's part of the whole story of Black Swan, is that Natalie Portman's character had perfect form but lacked content, lacked emotional content, right? And that's why her dance instructor was always like, "Where are you in this? The form is impeccable, but there's no content." So often it's, if you go with this, Madonna was content with weak form, or strong content, weak form, and Natalie Portman's character in Black Swan was um, strong form, weak content until she came around. And then this dancer is oh shoot, I can't remember her name now, and I thought I had left a note. Sorry for myself, but okay. This is a famous dancer, and she's thought to be able to embrace both artistic form and content so that you can't really separate them out that or when you're participating. She unites them perfectly. Now, subject matter is just what's the stuff that you're focusing on? What are you trying to capture, right? Content is the meaning of a work of art, and the content's embedded in its artistic form, hopefully, if it's a successful artwork. But what does the content interpret? That is subject matter. So, content's the interpretation of some subject matter, which is the fourth basic concept that helps us identify a work of art. So we're still working through that. This is a rough theoretical chapter, everybody. Future ones won't be as beefy as this one. But so since every work of art has to have a content, you can't just have nothing. You can imagine going to a concert that's just nothing, and then somebody tries to tell you that's it, this is that we meant that to be the case. That's why it's art. You came here expecting a concert and it's nothing. I mean, right? It's funny to think about. So since every work of art must have a content, every work of art's got to have a subject matter, and this can be any aspect of experience that's of human interest, particularly of interest to the artist. And anything related to a human interest is a value, back to the value question. Art shows us what an artist values. Artists try to show us sometimes what we value. And some values are positive, like pleasure and health. Other values are negative, like pain and sickness. Right? Some art is critical of the world, and some is celebratory of the world. And in this, you can see what sort of human values are being, the artist is attempting to reveal. What slice of life are they trying to light up and show to us so that we can learn something about what we do value or perhaps what we should value? So subject matter and artistic forms. Oh, whoop, back here. Obviously, this is there just because, look, subject matter here, it's a photograph. Subject matter, flowers in a vase. That's it, right? That is what this photograph is of. But if we come over here, when where subject matter is of value, and something of importance that we may perceive before any artistic interpretation, the content is the significantly interpreted subject matter as revealed by the artistic form. Now, that's a mouthful. And I took this right from the book. I take a lot of pertinent stuff right from the book and try to unpack it in these. But The idea is this: flowers here. Just going to move this through. In each of these paintings, the subject matter, right, is flowers, something that people do value in some way, right? Or the artist values. Subject matter, flowers, 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 flowers. And they're all interpreted differently, and they're all done with different artistic form, and they're all done with different like emotional content. So the point here is that I'm trying to make here is that artistic form, the form that you use, the way that these people are painting these things, um, changes. They're all painting the same content or the subject matter, but their form is changing the emotional content, right? Really, what I'm attempting to do here is to show you how all four of these will come together. They're not totally separated. So flowers look like this here, kind of, and whatever emotional impact that has on you. This is very different. This is very different. You might say that this one is happy and joyous and celebratory, or this one's a little more somber and nostalgic, right? It's still flowers, but the form is changing the way that we perceive flowers, changing the content is what that we call it. So, after all that, a quicker way to think about subject matter, artistic form, and content altogether. Subject matter is the depicted object or objects like flowers. Artistic form is the visual organization of that stuff. And then content is the emotional impact or meaning of the work of art. So, again, another example. Look at here. We've got a Picasso painting of a horse, right? Content, or excuse me, subject matter, same. Horse, horse. Form, artistic form, totally different. And because those artistic forms is totally different and the intent of the artist is obviously different, this has a different content or meaning than this once we start participating with it. And same here. These are two paintings of the theme of Daniel in the lion's den. And so the one on the left is Rubens and the one on the right is Riviere's. And so same subject matter. Daniel, and it's a biblical story, Old Testament, Daniel in the lion's den. Different artistic forms, different content. Again, content is the emotional meaning or impact of the work of art. So this one looks like, I mean, this one, if you look at it, I would say that it looks like the lions aren't necessarily dangerous to him. He's just in there. It looks like he really wants to get out of there, right? But the way that and it's hopeful, right? This one looks hopeful too, but the lions look a little more dangerous here, right? So same, dangerous to him, that is, and he seems also less concerned about them, less frightened than this one. So point, same subject matter. It's an Old Testament story, different artistic forms and different, hence, or also different content. See, like skull. This can be, here's a skull. So all of these have the same subject matter, skull, right? Painted it or crafted in different forms. So you get different content. This can be content here can be seen as farcical, sarcastic, or perhaps funny, let's say. This content, scary, let's say. This can be, I don't know, like almost you get a historical sense perhaps from this. This seems celebratory. So does this. This seems somewhat historical and nostalgic also, right? To me, may strike you differently. But again, that's another example. Now, finally, participation, artistic form, and content. Again, this is the critical bringing it together here. Participation is the necessary condition that makes our insightful perception of artistic form and content possible. So, in other words, we got to participate with the artwork in order to see the power of its artistic form. You got to give it the time it deserves. All right, and if we don't participate, you're going to miss seeing how the details work together to form a totality, and you're also going to be deprived of the ability to grasp the content fully, because artistic form and content are inseparable when we're talking about a successful work of art. And then we're going to lose out on the ability to gain insight into the subject matter. So point here, the four elements or the four concepts in identifying a work of art perceptually all hinge on your participation. They're meaningless if you don't take, and if we don't take the time to participate with them. It doesn't mean you have to participate with every single thing, just some of them, or just the ones that strike you, at least at first. Participate. Ask yourself, why is this grabbing my attention? Right? Again, we'll probably go through different genres of artwork that some are going to be much more interesting to you in this course than others. Guaranteed, they certainly are to me. And within those genres, some you're going to like and be much more interested in some examples than you are in others. That's certainly the case with me. Right? You don't have to participate out in the world and beyond this class. You don't have to participate with every single artwork that's thrown your way. You'd have no time to do anything else. But it would be wonderful if you could start to cultivate some participation in the stuff that at least strikes you, you know? So, topics covered. Whew, that was a long one. The three criteria for determining whether something's a work of art, right? And the four terms related to the perceptual nature of a work of art. We spent quite a bit of time on that. These are important, though, to distinguish, to separate out from one another, but then remember that they're all part of a whole and a whole experience. They aren't discrete. We only treat them as discrete for clarifying what each of them mean. This should be coming together as one in a successful work of art.